Hey guys, how's it going? I wasn't going to make a video, but I felt morally obligated to put out content for Moxie to steal so that he could feed his family. So now that he's had a chance to copy paste my previous build, I thought I'd get into some details about what I'm doing with Stormclaw. So the first main thing you might notice is that I'm actually going to be separating the builds into two different versions. I've had 1,000 different people asking me about the blanket ring and how it can be incorporated into the build. So I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that, and I'll have a specific build just for you. One of the builds is going to be primarily a mid-game build with a focus on AoE, and the other build is going to be more of an end-game build with more of a focus on bossing and survivability. So to make sure you guys have the best information possible, I did a bunch of extra testing to make sure that everything was what I thought. And the results came out about how I expected them to. So first off, I took off all of the RNG, and I only used one aspect at a time in order to test which ones were better than each other. As you can see, Overcharge is a clear winner here. And this has always been true through all my testing, even back in the preseason. And in case you didn't realize before, yes, Overcharge hits the single target that you are attacking. Next up, I took all of the aspects that were left over, and I put them with Overcharge so we could see which one paired the best with Overcharge. As you can see from the green numbers over here, Runeworkers won. And while testing this, I only used the baseline on Electrocution, so we actually have a little bit more damage we can put into this on our Paragon boards. So Runeworkers ends up being the best result by far. One thing of note though, Intercom ends up being stronger if you can stand still for an extended period of time, but most bosses tend to move enough that it's not really going to be as beneficial. But it's definitely a fun one if you want to see your attack power go up. While I was testing this build, I got up to 45,000 attack power. And down here you can see the rings that I used. When I was doing the testing, I wanted it to be as accurate as possible, so I tried to make sure that all the rings had the same stats. These are all fairly similar to each other, and the ones I suspected to be worse, I put on the better rings so that when I did the test, it would kind of be anti-bias. So for example, Edgemasters I assumed was probably the worst, and I had the best stats on it, and it still ended up being the worst in the testing. By the way, you might be wondering how I got so much more power in this build, and what it comes down to is the training dummies. This was the first time I actually got to sit down and test to see what types of damage actually affect things like Runeworker and Overcharge. So previously, things like this that said Storm Skill damage, I automatically assumed because it said skill that it didn't apply to on-hit effects. But this actually applies to Runeworkers, Overcharge, and Overload. And it's the same for any nature magic skill damage. Unfortunately, that is not the case with Edgemasters, which is why Edgemasters didn't make it through the testing. This allows us to get more multiplicative damage like Earth and Sky, which is a much better choice than Fulminate because it affects our Claw as well as our lightning damage. Now all 6 of our glyphs are multiplicative damage bonuses. Now you might be wondering what this whole blue section is up here. This is just a screenshot from my video editor showing all of the testing I did side by side with video. All of these numbers are the numbers of frames in the video that it took to kill the boss. And the 4 on the right are the ones that I tested after I put Overcharge on with the others. Now another question that's come up very often is why am I using Emerald instead of Topaz? So previously I hadn't actually taken the time to test it on a dummy, but I made the assumption that with the Overcharge and the Runeworkers and all the on-hit effects that we had, that it would be much better to have Emerald so that all of our damage is benefiting from our gems. After testing on the dummy, I was able to confirm that as well. So I tested Topaz with Distant on rings instead of Lucky Hit, and that was the worst damage combination. I also tried Topaz with Lucky Hit on the ring, and that came out to be slightly faster. Then I tested Emerald Gems and Distant on the rings, and that was a little bit faster. And then Emerald Gems and Lucky Hit on the rings, and that was significantly faster. This makes sense because the Lucky Hit triggers those on-hit effects, and then those on-hit effects get the bonus from the Emeralds. So let me explain to you how this build works. We've got the Great Staff of the Crone, and this is going to allow us to use our Claw ability to also cast Storm Strike. So if we go into our abilities, you can see that we have all the points into Claw and all of the points into Storm Strike. That's a lot of damage, and we get to do that every time we swipe. If you see my attack speed, this isn't even the fastest I can go. With Ravenous, I actually go faster than this. Moonrise, I go faster than this. But a lot of our damage isn't coming from the skills themselves. We've got Overcharge. This is doing a little AoE whenever we get a lucky hit on enemies with it. Then we've got Runeworker's Conduit. This is striking enemies with lightning bolts. And you'll see in the other variation of the build that we have things like X-Falls that does more lucky hit. We also have even more lightning damage from Overload. Another thing that's great about attacking fast with 3 basic attacks is that we have Undying. This is going to heal us for 3% of our life every single time we swipe. And this works even if you do it without having an enemy. Now you might be going, wait, 3 basic attacks? Yeah, we're using Nature's Fury, which means we have a 30% chance for Earth Spike to be cast every time we use Claw. And because Claw is also using Storm Strike, we have another 30% chance to use Earth Spike. So basically 60% of the time, we're using 3 basic attacks every time. For the rest of our abilities, we've got our Bulwark. This is something that we're going to be spamming all the time. This is going to increase our damage with our Tybalt's Will because it makes us unstoppable. And it's going to give us a barrier and that unstoppable that keeps us from getting CC'd. When you use this, you can swipe with Claw in order to get resets on the Bulwark's cooldown. That allows you to spam it constantly. You can see on our boots, we have Symbiotic Aspect. This is what's giving us that cooldown. Now here I'm using Harlequin Crest, which is a very rare item in the game. But don't worry, this build works perfectly fine without any uniques except for the Grey Staff of the Crone. If you don't have Crone, don't do this build. I have cleared every single piece of content in the game using only the Grey Staff of Crone and Legendaries. But if you don't have the Grey Staff of the Crone, you're going to have a bad time on this build. For our other skills, we've got Hurricane. We're mostly using this for the 20% damage reduction it applies to enemies. Then we've got Poison Creeper. We're going to be able to reset our Poison Creeper's cooldown quite often with Pack Leader. You're going to want to apply this every 3 seconds so that you can get the 20% critical strike chance bonus on it. This will also be extremely valuable when you're using the other variation of the build with X-Falls. Debilitating Roar gives us another source of Fortify, but the main thing it's doing is it reduces enemy damage by a massive amount for 4 seconds. This and our ultimate Petrify are great ways to get out of sticky situations and reduce enemy damage or stun the enemies. Petrify also amplifies the critical strike damage that you do to enemies, so it's great for bosses and just great for killing things in general. Now, I highly recommend using a controller for this build, and I like to put my Claw on my bottom button and my Bulwark on my other button. That way, I can just hold them both down, and it'll automatically reset the cooldown of Bulwark and recast Bulwark all the time. The other nice thing about controller is you're able to swipe while you move around. If you're on keyboard and mouse, you won't be able to do that. Let me show you. The closest you can do is dashing in between each swipe, but it's not nearly the same. If you're using the other variation of the build, this is a great way to get the cooldown on your flicker step back so you can use your dash again. So as you're moving, you can be swiping, and then you just dash each time you get it reset. You don't have to hit an enemy in order to get the cooldown back when you're using boots that have attacks reduce cooldowns. So this is what you're looking for your stats. Your resistances should basically be maxed out. I have a little bit here that's not maxed out because my accessories are lower item power. You should have over 20,000 attack power, 13,300 armor, about 20,000 maximum life, 55% critical strike chance when your Sanguine Brace is active, close to 500% critical strike damage, damage versus close, 230%. And if you really want to crank your DPS, you can drop the maximum life on your rings and add Distant here. That'll give you a bunch of multiplicative damage from your Thunderstruck node. Now you probably want to see a Nightmare Dungeon, so I'm going to take you into a tier 95 Nightmare Dungeon. I would have done a tier 100, but this is what was in my inventory. Now keep in mind the other variation of the build is actually going to be better for Nightmare Dungeons because it has a lot of AoE built into it. But if you're doing tier 100 dungeons, I highly recommend not using the Mad Wolf's Glee chest piece. And instead you can use a legendary chest piece that has Aspect of Might on it. Or if your armor's not hitting 13,300, then you'll want to use Aspect of Disobedience with it. Alright, we already went over our skills, so I won't go through those. But for our Spirit Boons, we're doing Wariness. We're going to be taking Scythe Talons and Avian Wrath. One note about Avian Wrath, this is additive. It's not multiplicative like it shows here, but it is actually 45% additive. I don't know why. I was kind of torn between the max life, the attack speed, and the critical damage. If you need more survivability, easy choice for the max life there. If you want more attack speed, easy choice there. And if you want more damage, easy choice here. I just like seeing the bigger numbers, and it's not that big of a difference either way. Under Wolf, we're taking Pack Leader. This is for resetting our Poison Creeper. And then we're taking Overload under our Snake. For our items, I recommend Harlequin Crest here, but if you don't have a Harlequin Crest, you can always use a Godslayer. You can always use a Legendary Helm. If you're looking for the stats for stuff, you just click on this little thing here on the Mobalytics guide, and you can see all the detailed stats that I recommend. You can also use Tempest Roar and Mad Wolf's Glee combo. It's pretty good early on, and great for AoE. You can also use Enduriel's Visage. I haven't gotten it myself, but I think it's a pretty good option. I can't really say exactly how good. On the chest armor, I'm recommending Aspect of Might. If you don't have enough armor, you might need to use Disobedience here. Your goal is to try and get to 13,300 for Nightmare 100 dungeons. On the gloves, we're going Conceited. Technically, Conceited can go on either of the rings as well. It just depends what you want to do. If you're trying to go swap rings, you probably want to have Overcharge on the gloves, and then you can have Conceited and Runeworkers on the rings. That way it's easier for you to throw on the unique rings if you choose. For the pants, we're doing Tybalt's Will. This is basically required. It's a 40% damage multiplier. On the boots, we got Symbiotic. For this version of the build, Symbiotic is required, but it's an easy adjustment if you want to go back to Ursine Strength and use Metamorphosis instead. That will allow you to use Flicker Step. For our weapon, Grey Staff of the Crone, this is a requirement for the build. On our amulet, we're doing Rapid. We're doing Runeworker's Conduit on one of the rings and Overcharged on the other. For our gems, we're going to go with Emerald on the weapon. I already talked about that previously. We're not using Topaz here. For the armor, we're going with Ruby. And for the jewelry, we're going with Diamonds. If for some reason your resistances were high enough, maybe you have completely maxed 925 accessories and your resistances are high enough, you might be able to take one of these off for armor, but it's pretty tight on the resistances. For our vampire powers, we're going with Moonrise and Ravenous for the attack speed and the damage to basics. Prey on the Weaks, just a 16% damage multiplier. We're using Undying for survivability, and Sanguine Brace is giving us Fortify and an 8% critical strike chance. Now, I've already shown you gameplay and talked about the abilities and whatnot, but if you need to read a gameplay loop, I've got that listed at the bottom here, as well as additional info on the build. And I also listed alternate aspects down here that you might want to choose. For our skill tree, we're going to max out our Claw and our Storm Strike, and we're going to get Wild Claw and Fierce Storm Strike. We're going to max out our critical strike chance here and our movement speed here. We're going to get 1 point in Bulwark and get Preserving Bulwark. We're maxing out Ancestral and Vigilance, and putting 1 point in Debilitating Roar. We're going to put 1 point in Poison Creeper and get Brutal Poison Creeper for that critical strike chance. We're going to get 1 point in our Elemental Exposure just so we can get up to Endless Tempest and Bad Omen and max both of those out. We're going to grab 1 point in Hurricane and get Savage Hurricane for that damage reduction. We're going to get Envenom maxed, and we're going to put 1 point in Toxic Claws so we apply Poison with our Claw. We're getting Petrify and just the 1 extra point, and we're going to max out Defiance. Then we're going to put 1 point in Quick Shift just so we can get the Heightened Senses for that damage reduction. If you're trying to maximize your damage for Lilith or that type of thing, you can take the 4 points out here and put 1 point here and then 3 points into Resonance. That'll give you a little bit more damage multiplier. For our Paragon boards, we've got Keeper on the first board, and then if we move up, we're going to be attaching Inner Beast, and we're going to be putting Electrocution on this board. After that, we go left, where we're going to place the Thunderstruck board, and we're going to be getting Fang and Claw here. Moving back across Inner Beast to the right, we're going to attach the Heightened Malice board, and we're going to put Earth and Sky here. Then we're going to move all the way to the top left, above the Thunderstruck board. We're going to attach Constricting Tendrils, and we're going to put Territorial here. Finally, we're going to attach the Ancestral Guidance board, and we're going to be putting Spirit here. Now, there is a little bit of leeway in this build for you to move points around for different things. If you're not hitting 20k HP, you might want to throw some points into some life nodes that are easily accessible. And you can pull damage out of things like the Vulnerable here or these Critical Strike damage nodes, and get those into the Survivability nodes. If you're not hitting that 13,300 armor, you've got a little bit extra armor up here you can grab. There's one here, and there's one down here. Same thing for resistances. You've got a resistance node here if you want to max out your resistances. And then on both Fang and Claw and Earth and Sky, you have a choice of how many of these Dex and Intelligence nodes you want to put in. These are purely here so that you can hit your bonuses on all of your nodes. However, you are not going to be hitting the bonus on this node, and you will not be hitting the bonus on this node, but you should be hitting every other bonus. Don't forget that you can adjust your points slightly in certain spots like this, where you could click the Intelligence here and remove the Dexterity here. And there's more spots like that down here and other spots on the board. All right, that was a lot to get through, but I hope this was helpful for you guys. I definitely feel like the build is in a lot better place now. I'm hitting harder, and my survivability is on point. Whenever we get closer to the Abattoir of Zir, I'll put out an updated Paragon board guide so that you guys can figure out where you're going to put the new glyph, and we'll probably adjust some points around for that. Also, depending on what the content is like, we may adjust some of our Paragons in order to get more survivability with things like Undaunted, Werewolf, or, Protector, things like that. But for right now, this can clear everything in the game, and I feel perfectly comfortable on it. But if you are somebody who's playing on hardcore, feel free to mess around with the glyphs and get more of that survivability into the build. But I think that about wraps it up. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.